Her first night was filled with fear. Then the cowboy proved love could be kind. Eliza had always lived a quiet, simple life in her small hometown. The streets were lined with wooden fences, and the air carried the smell of fresh hay and the soft scent of wildflowers from the nearby fields. Everyone knew everyone else in that town. Friends and neighbors would greet one another with warm smiles and casual waves. Life was predictable. Days began early with the crow of roosters, and evenings were spent under skies painted with shades of orange and pink. Eliza loved the small joys of her life, helping her mother in the kitchen, listening to the gentle hum of the river as she walked to fetch water, and laughing with the girls from her village during laundry days. But all that familiarity and comfort was about to change. Her father, a serious man with a deep voice and weathered hands, had arranged her marriage. Eliza had only ever met the man a couple of times. His name was Daniel, a cowboy who lived many miles away on a large ranch. He was a quiet man, known in the county for his hard work, his care for his cattle, and his reserved nature. Some of the neighbors had said he was kind, others had said he could be strict. Eliza could not tell what to expect. She had never been away from home before, and the thought of leaving everything she knew filled her with nervous anticipation and fear she could hardly explain. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a whirlwind. There were preparations, sewing, cleaning, and endless conversations about how she should behave, what she should wear, and what she should say. Eliza listened politely, nodded, and smiled, but inside a storm of questions and worries churned. Would Daniel be kind? Would he respect her? Would she ever feel at home in his house? On the morning of the wedding, the house was filled with a mixture of excitement and tension. Sunlight streamed through the windows, making the lace curtains glow softly. Her mother fussed over the final details, brushing stray strands of hair from Eliza's face and smoothing the folds of her dress. Her sisters whispered words of encouragement, but their voices carried an undercurrent of worry. They knew this was not just a wedding, but a young girl stepping into an unknown life. The ceremony itself was a blur of smiles, flowers, and polite congratulations. The townspeople sang hymns, and the minister spoke words of blessing that echoed in Eliza's mind. Her heart pounded, but it was not with joy, more with a strange mixture of nervousness and awe. The moment felt too big for her small body. She remembered looking at Daniel standing beside her, his tall frame steady and calm, his eyes fixed somewhere in the distance. He smiled once briefly and then looked away. That smile was not enough to calm the unease that tightened in her chest. As the day passed and the sun began to sink, it was time to leave for the ranch. The journey was long. Eliza sat quietly in the back of the carriage, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She watched the familiar fields shrink behind her, replaced gradually by open spaces, hills, and forests. The road seemed endless, and each mile made her feel smaller and more uncertain. When they finally arrived at the ranch, the house stood in the middle of wide fields, surrounded by wooden fences and barns. It was larger than any house she had lived in before, but its size only made it feel colder. The air smelled of leather, hay, and the faint smoke of the hearth. The wind blew through the open windows, rustling the curtains and carrying with it a sense of isolation. Eliza's heart beat faster. She had never been in such a big, quiet place, and the thought of living here with a man she barely knew made her stomach twist. Daniel greeted her at the door. He was tall and strong, with hands calloused from work and a face lined by sun and wind. But there was a softness in his eyes, a gentleness that surprised her. He did not rush to take her luggage or lead her inside. Instead, he removed his hat politely and nodded. His voice, when he spoke, was low and calm. "Welcome to your new home," he said. "I hope it will be a place where you feel safe." Eliza tried to smile, but it felt weak. She nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. She did not yet feel safe. The house seemed enormous and empty, the walls echoing her footsteps as she followed Daniel down the hallway. He opened the door to her room, a simple space with a large bed, a wooden dresser, and windows that looked out over the fields. It smelled faintly of wood polish and dust. The room was neat, but to Eliza it felt unfamiliar, cold, and intimidating. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands folded in her lap, feeling as if the walls were closing in. Every sound, the creak of the floorboards, the whisper of the wind, the distant call of a cow, made her flinch. She realized how much she had relied on the presence of her family, the laughter of neighbors, and the comforting routines of her old life. Now, she was alone in a strange place with a man she barely knew. Daniel, noticing her unease, took a careful step back. He did not approach too quickly or invade her space. Instead, he spoke softly, explaining the layout of the house, pointing out the kitchen, the barn, and the stable. He told her about the chores that would need attention and the routines of ranch life, but he did so gently, as if teaching rather than commanding. Eliza listened, but her mind wandered. She thought about her childhood home, the smell of fresh bread baking, the sound of her mother humming in the kitchen, the warmth of the hearth on cold winter nights. She thought about her sisters and the familiar creak of the old wooden stairs. All of that seemed so far away now. Her chest tightened and her fingers fidgeted in her lap. As night fell, shadows stretched across the room and the house grew quiet. Eliza's anxiety returned in full force. She imagined all the ways things could go wrong, all the ways she might fail or be unhappy. She wondered if Daniel would be impatient, harsh, or distant. The room felt bigger than before, and the bed seemed like a strange, unfamiliar presence. She pressed her hands against her knees, trying to steady her breathing. Then she heard the soft sound of boots approaching down the hallway. Her heart raced, and she felt a sudden urge to hide her fear, to appear brave even though she did not feel it. The doorknob turned slowly, and Daniel stepped into the room. He did not approach her immediately. Instead, he stopped a few steps away, giving her space. He spoke gently, asking if she was comfortable, if she was hungry, if she needed anything. His words were simple, kind, and patient. He did not force conversation. He did not press her to respond. He waited for her to find her own voice. Eliza realized slowly that he did not expect her to act a certain way or behave perfectly. That was a new feeling for her. Daniel explained that the first night was not meant to be overwhelming or frightening. Nothing would happen that she was not ready for. She could take her time to adjust, to learn about the house, about the ranch, and about him. He would not rush her. He would not demand anything she was not willing to give. His patience and respect began to ease the tightness in her chest. She still felt nervous, still felt afraid, but she began to notice the kindness in his eyes and the calm in his voice. For the first time that evening, she looked at him fully, not as a stranger or a distant figure, but as a man who seemed to care about her comfort. They spoke quietly, sharing small details about their lives. Eliza told him about her favorite spots near her childhood home, the little joys she had always enjoyed, and the simple dreams she held in her heart. Daniel listened attentively, never interrupting, never dismissing her words. He shared pieces of his own life, stories about the ranch, the horses, and his hopes for the future. There was no pressure, no hurry, only conversation and gentle presence. As the lantern burned low, Eliza felt a strange but comforting change. The fear that had gripped her earlier in the day began to fade, replaced by a tentative sense of safety. She realized that she was not alone in this new life. There was someone who would stand beside her, not above her. Someone who could guide her through the unknown without forcing her to surrender to it. When the night finally came to a close, Daniel placed a blanket over her and chose to rest in the chair by the window. He did not crowd her, did not demand closeness, and did not attempt to hurry the bond between them. Eliza lay in bed, her heart still racing slightly, but with a newfound sense of hope. She had faced her fear, and for the first time she felt that perhaps this new life could be gentle. The first night was still filled with uncertainty, but it was no longer consumed by fear. It was a night of beginnings, of understanding, of patience, and of the small but powerful realization that kindness could exist even in a world that felt so unknown. And in the quiet darkness of the ranch house, under the soft light of the lantern, Eliza allowed herself to imagine a future where fear could give way to trust, and where a life she had once feared could become a life she might someday embrace. Eliza woke the next morning to the soft light of the sun streaming through the windows. The quiet of the ranch house felt less intimidating now, almost comforting in a strange way. She sat on the edge of the bed for a few moments, listening to the distant sounds of the ranch waking up, the lowing of cattle, the rhythmic clatter of boots on wooden floors, and the occasional neigh of a horse. Her heart was still heavy with uncertainty, but something inside her had shifted. The night had been long and filled with fear, yet Daniel's patience had left a small seed of hope. She rose carefully, smoothing the wrinkles in her dress, and stepped toward the window. Outside, the fields stretched endlessly, painted in shades of green and gold. Morning mist clung to the grass, and the rising sun reflected off the dew, turning it into a blanket of tiny sparkles. It was beautiful, almost magical, and for a moment Eliza forgot about her fear. She imagined herself walking through the fields, running her hands through the tall grass, feeling the freedom of the open land. A soft knock at the door startled her. She turned to see Daniel standing there, holding a small tray with a cup of tea and a slice of bread. He smiled, not in a commanding way, but gently, almost shyly. "Good morning," he said softly. "I thought you might like some breakfast before the chores start." Eliza hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say. Then, with a small nod, she accepted the tray. His gesture seemed so simple, yet it carried a warmth that made her chest feel lighter. She realized that kindness could be quiet, not loud or flashy, and still be powerful. They sat together at the small kitchen table, the sun warming their backs, and she took a sip of tea. The warmth spread through her body, calming her nerves. Daniel spoke of small things, how the chickens liked to be fed in the morning, which fields needed tending first, and how the cows were likely to behave today. His voice was steady and even, never rushed, never impatient. He explained things as though he were showing her a world she had never seen before, not as though he were ordering her to follow instructions. Eliza listened, feeling her mind open to this new way of life. She had always imagined marriage as a series of rules to obey, of expectations to meet. But Daniel's words painted a different picture. He spoke of cooperation, understanding, and shared responsibilities. He explained that the ranch required teamwork and that they would learn together. His tone carried no judgment, only encouragement. After breakfast, he invited her to join him outside. She hesitated, but the thought of standing in the morning sun, feeling the wind on her face, drew her forward. They stepped onto the porch, and Daniel handed her a pair of gloves and a wide-brimmed hat. "You'll need these if you want to help with the horses," he said. "Or you can watch if you prefer. There's no rush." Eliza felt a flicker of excitement. She had never been near horses so close before, and the thought of learning something new made her heart race, not with fear but with curiosity. She followed him to the stable, where the horses greeted them with soft snorts and gentle nudges. Daniel spoke to each one as though they were old friends, explaining their temperaments and habits. He encouraged her to touch them, to feel their strength and warmth. She hesitated at first, unsure if the horse would respond kindly. But Daniel stayed by her side, gently guiding her hand to a soft muzzle, and she felt a spark of connection she had never imagined. The morning passed with small discoveries. Eliza learned to brush the horses, feed them, and even lead them across the yard. She laughed at herself when a horse nudged her unexpectedly, and Daniel chuckled alongside her, not mocking, but sharing in her amusement. She began to notice that he did not expect perfection. He noticed effort, sincerity, and openness, and praised her gently when she did well. By midday, her fear had begun to melt. The ranch, which had seemed vast and intimidating the night before, now felt like a place of possibility. She saw the world through Daniel's eyes, filled with life, care, and subtle beauty. He pointed out the ways to tend to the fields, how to watch for signs of illness in the cattle, and even shared stories of the ranch's history. Eliza listened, fascinated, realizing that she was not just learning chores, but becoming part of a living, breathing world she had never imagined. Daniel did not force closeness or demand that she understand everything at once. He walked beside her patiently, answering questions and encouraging her to ask more. He noticed when she was hesitant and offered support without pressure. For Eliza, this was new. She had always been told what to do and how to behave. But here, on this open land, with this quiet, steady man, she was learning that she could make choices and still feel safe. That afternoon, a sudden summer storm approached. Dark clouds rolled across the sky and the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Eliza's heart leapt with panic. She had seen storms before, but the sound of rain hitting the roof and the gusts whipping around the house made her feel small and unprotected. She froze, unsure what to do. Daniel noticed immediately. Without a word of judgment, he took her hand and led her to the porch. "It's going to be all right," he said calmly. "The storm will pass. Let's just watch it together." They stood side by side, the wind tugging at their clothes and hair. Daniel pointed out the patterns in the rain, explaining how the cattle would find shelter and how the winds would shift. His voice was like an anchor, steady and reassuring. Eliza clung to it, feeling the tight knot of fear in her chest slowly loosen. She realized that sometimes courage was not about ignoring fear, it was about having someone steady beside you while it passed. By the time the storm ended, the sky had cleared, and a rainbow stretched across the horizon. Eliza smiled, feeling a sense of relief and awe. She looked at Daniel, and for the first time, she saw him not just as the man she had married, but as someone who cared deeply for her well-being. She felt a quiet gratitude for his patience, for the way he had allowed her to face the storm without forcing her into action she wasn't ready for. In the following days, they established routines. Mornings were spent tending the animals and the fields. Afternoons brought lessons about the ranch and its rhythms. Evenings were quiet, with soft conversations by the fire or on the porch. Eliza learned that marriage was not a single moment or a single act, but a series of small choices made every day, choices to listen, to understand, to care. Daniel never pressured her to feel affection before she was ready. He did not rush intimacy or demand attention. Instead, he allowed their relationship to grow slowly, like the crops in the fields, nurtured with care and patience. Eliza began to see that love could be gentle, and that strength was not always shown in force, but in steadiness and understanding. One evening, as they watched the sun set over the horizon, Daniel spoke softly about his own fears and doubts. He shared stories of nights when he had felt alone or unsure, and of the lessons he had learned from working the ranch and caring for animals. Eliza listened intently, realizing that everyone had fears, even those who seemed strong on the outside. She understood that sharing fears did not make a person weak. It made them human, and it made trust possible. Over time, she noticed subtle changes within herself. The nervousness that had once gripped her chest each morning now softened into curiosity. The hesitation in her step became confidence. She laughed more freely, spoke more openly, and even began to anticipate the days ahead instead of dreading them. The house, once intimidating, became a home. The vast fields, once overwhelming, became a place of exploration and learning. And Daniel, once a distant and unknowable figure, became a steady presence she could rely on. Every act of kindness, every patient word, every gentle gesture built trust between them. Eliza realized that this was the heart of love, consistency, respect, and care over time. It was not shown in grand declarations or dramatic moments, but in everyday actions. The way Daniel placed a blanket over her at night, the way he waited while she learned to saddle a horse, the way he explained chores without pressure or expectation. By the end of the first month, Eliza could hardly remember the fear that had consumed her on the first night. She still had moments of uncertainty, but they were met with patience and guidance rather than force. She began to imagine a future on the ranch, a life filled with shared work, quiet companionship, and gentle understanding. She realized that her first night, which had seemed so frightening, had been the start of something meaningful, a foundation of trust and kindness that would support them both for years to come. Eliza learned that day by day, trust could grow, that fear could give way to courage. That kindness could replace uncertainty, and that love, true and patient, could be shown in the quietest, simplest ways. By the time the sun set on that first month, casting a warm, golden light across the fields, Eliza felt something she had never felt before. She was beginning to belong. Not because she had mastered the ranch or understood everything about Daniel, but because she had discovered that she could be herself and still be accepted, protected, and cared for. The weeks that followed brought a steady rhythm to Eliza's life. Each morning, the sun rose over the wide fields, painting the land in shades of gold and green, and she found herself waking with a sense of purpose she had never known before. The early hours were filled with work, feeding the animals, tending the chickens, collecting eggs, and learning the ways of the ranch under Daniel's careful guidance. He never rushed her. Instead, he showed her patiently, step by step, answering every question she asked and offering gentle encouragement when she made mistakes. Eliza began to understand that learning a new life was a process, and that patience was a gift Daniel was giving her every single day. She had always thought that marriage meant giving up herself and fitting into someone else's life entirely. But Daniel's kindness taught her a different lesson. He allowed her to explore, to make mistakes, and even to laugh at herself when things went wrong. One morning, she had accidentally spilled water over a pile of feed, and instead of scolding her, Daniel simply laughed softly and said, "That's all right. The cows won't mind. Let's just clean it up together." The simple act of sharing the responsibility, rather than punishing her for it, made her feel capable and included. Eliza also discovered the subtle beauty of the ranch life. The world she had left behind in her small town seemed narrow now, compared to the vast sky and the endless horizon. She watched the sun rise behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pasture, and she felt a quiet awe. The fields were alive, not just with animals, but with colors, sounds, and rhythms she had never noticed before. Each day was a new discovery. She began to understand the seasons, the way the soil changed, how the plants grew, and how every living thing had its place. Daniel's guidance helped her see it all, not as chores or work, but as a living, breathing world she could be a part of. The horses became her closest companions on the ranch. Each one had its own personality, and Daniel encouraged her to notice the differences. There was Bramble, the gentle mare who loved to nuzzle her hand, and Thunder, the tall, strong stallion who could be stubborn but loyal once trust was earned. Eliza spent hours brushing them, feeding them, and learning to ride. At first, she had been afraid of falling, but Daniel's steady presence gave her courage. He held the reins while she mounted, spoke to her in calm, reassuring tones, and never made her feel pressured. Gradually, she learned to ride on her own, feeling a mixture of pride, freedom, and connection to the animals around her. Their days were not all work. Evenings often brought moments of quiet conversation. Sometimes they would sit on the porch swing, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the sky turn shades of pink and orange. Other times, they would sit by the fireplace, sipping tea and sharing stories about their pasts. Daniel told Eliza about his childhood on the ranch, the adventures he had with his siblings, and the lessons he had learned from his parents. Eliza shared her memories of home, the laughter of her sisters, and the songs her mother used to hum while working in the kitchen. These conversations, small as they seemed, created a bridge between them. She realized that trust and understanding were built in quiet, everyday moments, not just in dramatic gestures. Eliza began to notice subtle changes within herself. The fear that had once gripped her on her first night had softened into cautious curiosity. She laughed more freely now, sometimes at her own mistakes, sometimes at Daniel's dry sense of humor. She learned to speak openly about her thoughts and feelings, knowing that Daniel would listen without judgment. She discovered a sense of independence and confidence she had never experienced before. One afternoon, while helping Daniel mend a fence, a sudden gust of wind caught her off guard. The wooden boards rattled and a stray nail fell near her foot. She jumped back, startled, and her heart raced. Daniel noticed immediately. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, steadying her. "It's okay," he said softly. "Accidents happen, we just need to be careful. I'll help you." He showed her how to hold the hammer properly, how to secure the boards, and how to work with the tools safely. His patience never wavered. He explained each step as if teaching a friend, not scolding a novice. Eliza felt a wave of relief wash over her. She realized that trust was not just about words, but about consistent actions. Daniel's steady guidance and gentle care made her feel protected, and that protection was not limiting. It was empowering. The trust they built extended beyond work. Daniel paid attention to the small details of Eliza's life. He noticed when she was tired, when she was nervous, or when she seemed distracted. On those days, he adjusted the pace, offering rest, conversation, or simply quiet companionship. Eliza began to understand that love was not always shown in grand gestures, but often in these subtle, thoughtful actions. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast sky. Eliza leaned back against the railing and sighed, feeling both exhausted and content. Daniel handed her a blanket and draped it over her shoulders. "You've done well today," he said. "I'm proud of you." Eliza smiled, feeling warmth spread through her chest. It was a simple statement, but it carried weight. She had never felt such genuine appreciation before. She realized that she was not just completing tasks, she was learning, growing, and becoming part of something larger than herself. And Daniel, through his patience and encouragement, was helping her see her own strength. As the months passed, the bond between them deepened. They began to anticipate each other's needs without words. Eliza learned which chores Daniel preferred to do alone and which ones he enjoyed sharing. Daniel learned how Eliza liked to approach tasks, how she preferred to start the day, and what small comforts made her feel at ease. Their lives intertwined in a natural rhythm, each day building on the last, each moment strengthening their connection. Even during challenges, their relationship held firm. One day, a sudden illness struck one of the cows, and Eliza panicked, unsure how to help. Daniel stayed calm, guiding her through the process of tending to the animal, explaining each step, and reassuring her that mistakes were part of learning. Eliza watched and listened, following his instructions carefully. By the end of the day, the cow was stable, and Eliza felt a sense of accomplishment she had never imagined. She realized that facing challenges together, with patience and guidance, made fear smaller and confidence grow. Eliza also began to understand the quiet power of observation. Daniel did not force her to act or perform. Instead, he watched and waited, allowing her to notice details, make decisions, and learn through experience. This approach gave her a sense of agency. She felt that her choices mattered, that she was valued not just for what she could do, but for who she was. The small routines of ranch life became rituals of connection. Morning chores, afternoon lessons, and evening conversations were not monotonous. They were opportunities for growth, learning, and companionship. Eliza discovered that stability could be beautiful, that work could be fulfilling. That love could be patient and steady, showing itself not in grand statements but in everyday acts of care. One evening, after a particularly long day, Daniel surprised her by lighting a small lantern near the porch swing. The soft glow of light created a cozy corner amidst the vast darkness of the surrounding fields. They sat together, watching fireflies dance and listening to the gentle hum of the evening wind. Daniel shared stories from his childhood, times when he had been afraid, when he had made mistakes, and when he had learned lessons the hard way. Eliza listened intently, feeling closer to him than ever before. She realized that vulnerability was not weakness, and that sharing fears and experiences was a path to deeper trust. Slowly, Eliza's initial fear of her new life faded into a quiet confidence. She began to take initiative, helping Daniel plan tasks for the ranch, noticing small improvements that could be made, and even suggesting new ideas. Daniel welcomed her input, respecting her observations and praising her for her thoughtfulness. Eliza felt empowered, realizing that her voice mattered, that her presence was valued. The quiet moments of daily life became the foundation of their growing love. A shared laugh, a gesture of care, or simply sitting together in silence all contributed to a bond built on respect, patience, and understanding. Eliza had once feared the unknown, the overwhelming vastness of the ranch, and the man she had married. But now she understood that trust could be nurtured slowly, love could be gentle, and companionship could be steady and kind. By the end of the 3rd month, Eliza felt a transformation within herself. She was no longer the timid girl who had arrived at the ranch, uncertain and afraid. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable. She had discovered courage she didn't know she possessed, and had learned that kindness and patience were forms of strength, just as much as skill or knowledge. Daniel and Eliza had developed a rhythm that worked for both of them. Their days were filled with work, learning, and small joys, and their nights were calm and comfortable. They laughed together, learned together, and supported each other in ways that went beyond words. Eliza realized that love was not about rushing, demanding, or controlling. It was about allowing each other to grow, respecting boundaries and building trust step by step. And in that steady, patient way, Eliza's life on the ranch became a life she could embrace. The fear of her first night, once so strong and consuming, had transformed into understanding, curiosity, and trust. She had discovered that love, when shown with care and patience, could be safe, empowering, and deeply fulfilling. As the months turned into a full year, Eliza's life on the ranch had transformed completely. What had once been a place of fear and uncertainty had now become a world she could understand, navigate, and even love. Each day brought new lessons, not just about ranch work but about herself, about Daniel, and about what it meant to live a life built on patience, care, and understanding. Eliza woke early, as she always did, to the soft light of dawn spilling over the fields. The familiar sounds of the ranch, the lowing of cows, the soft clatter of hooves on dirt, the wind rustling through the trees greeted her like old friends. She smiled quietly to herself, realizing how far she had come. She remembered her first night at the ranch, how lonely and frightening it had seemed, and she felt a small surge of pride. She had learned to face the unknown, to adapt, and to trust in the goodness of someone else. Daniel was already awake, tending to the animals. He moved with calm efficiency, each task done with care. When he noticed her at the window, he gave a small nod and smile. Eliza felt a warmth at that gesture. It was subtle, but it carried the weight of understanding and trust. They did not need grand words to communicate what had grown between them. Small, consistent gestures had built a strong connection. After breakfast, they walked through the fields together. Daniel pointed out the changes in the land since spring, showing Eliza how the soil had grown richer, how the crops were thriving, and how the animals were healthier than ever. He explained that all of this was a result of patience, steady care, and attention to detail. Eliza listened intently, realizing that the lessons applied not only to the ranch but to life and to their relationship. Love, like a farm, required nurturing, patience, and careful attention. Eliza had grown more confident in her work. She could feed the animals, check on the crops, and even handle unexpected problems with poise. One day, when a calf had been born unexpectedly in the middle of the night, Eliza had helped Daniel ensure that both mother and calf were safe. She had cleaned the calf, guided it to the mother, and comforted both animals. Daniel had watched her quietly, offering assistance only when necessary, and when the task was complete, he had said, "You did very well tonight. I'm proud of you." That simple acknowledgement had filled her heart with pride and deepened her trust in him. Over time, the trust between them deepened in ways Eliza could not have imagined. She began to see Daniel not as a stranger or a figure of authority, but as a partner, a friend, and a guide. They shared responsibilities equally. When a storm approached, they worked together to secure the barn and animals. When a sick horse needed care, they tended to it side by side. Even in small, ordinary tasks, their bond strengthened. Eliza noticed the subtle ways Daniel cared for her, always quietly without drawing attention to himself. He would leave fresh water and a warm blanket by her side, quietly observe when she struggled, and offer gentle encouragement rather than criticism. These acts, small as they seemed, showed her a kind of love that was steady, reliable, and deeply reassuring. She realized that love did not need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It could thrive in patience, understanding, and quiet kindness. Their evenings were often filled with shared moments that built intimacy and companionship. Sometimes they would sit on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the vast sky and share stories of their pasts. Other times, they would walk through the fields, hand in hand, speaking softly about plans for the future or the dreams they held quietly in their hearts. Eliza discovered that these quiet moments were just as powerful, if not more so, than any grand expression of love. One afternoon, while tending to the horses, Eliza noticed how much she had grown. She could ride confidently across the fields, communicate with the animals, and even handle tasks that had once seemed impossible. She felt a sense of pride in her abilities, but more importantly, she felt a deep sense of belonging. The ranch, which had once been foreign and intimidating, had become a place where she could thrive. And Daniel, who had once seemed distant and unknowable, had become a constant source of support and encouragement. Even when challenges arose, their relationship held firm. One day, a neighboring storm caused a fence to break, and some of the cattle wandered into the wrong field. Daniel and Eliza worked together through the night, repairing the fence, guiding the animals back, and ensuring everyone was safe. Eliza's hands were sore and her body ached, but she felt a quiet satisfaction. They had faced a challenge together, and the trust they had built carried them through. Daniel never criticized her mistakes. He only offered guidance and support. That patience strengthened her confidence and her love for him. Eliza also learned to trust herself more. She realized that she had strength she had never known, strength in patience, strength in learning, strength in adapting. She had faced fear, uncertainty, and new responsibilities, and she had emerged stronger each time. Daniel's steady support had given her the freedom to grow at her own pace, and that freedom was a gift she cherished deeply. As time passed, she began to notice the small joys of life on the ranch more vividly. The smell of freshly cut hay, the sound of the river running nearby, the warmth of sunlight on her skin, and the quiet companionship of Daniel, all of these became sources of happiness. She realized that contentment was not about excitement or grand adventures, but about noticing the simple, beautiful things around her and appreciating them. Their love continued to grow in subtle but powerful ways. They learned each other's habits, preferences, and moods. Daniel knew when to give Eliza space, when to offer help, and when to simply stand quietly beside her. Eliza learned how to read his expressions, anticipate his needs, and communicate her own feelings openly and honestly. Their relationship became a balance of respect, understanding, and partnership. One evening, as the sun set over the horizon, Daniel and Eliza sat together on the porch swing. The sky was painted in shades of orange, pink, and purple, and the fields stretched endlessly before them. Eliza leaned against Daniel's shoulder, feeling a sense of peace she had never known. She thought about the journey she had taken, from a frightened young girl on her first night at the ranch to a confident woman who had learned to trust, adapt, and love. Daniel spoke softly, sharing memories of his childhood, times of fear, and moments of learning. Eliza listened, realizing that vulnerability was not weakness, and that sharing one's fears and experiences was a path to deeper connection. She felt grateful for the man beside her, not because he had saved her or changed her life overnight, but because he had walked patiently with her, step by step, allowing her to grow in her own time. Eliza reflected on the lessons she had learned. She realized that fear was natural when facing the unknown, but it could be overcome with patience, guidance, and support. She understood that love was not about power or control, but about care, respect, and steady presence. She had discovered that a kind, patient heart could turn fear into trust, uncertainty into confidence, and a new place into a home. By the end of the year, the ranch felt like a true home. Eliza could move through the rooms with ease, ride the horses confidently, tend to the animals, and manage the daily tasks with skill and grace. She had become a part of the life she once feared, and Daniel had become more than a husband. He was a partner, a teacher, and a friend. Eliza often thought back to that first night, when the house had seemed cold and intimidating, and her heart had trembled with fear. She remembered the uncertainty, the quiet panic, and the overwhelming sense of being alone. But she also remembered Daniel's gentle presence, his patient words, and the calm he had brought to her world. That night had been the beginning, not of a perfect life, but of a life filled with growth, trust, and the quiet power of kindness. She began to share her experiences with others in the community, especially young women who were about to enter marriage. She told them that fear was natural, that trust could grow slowly, and that love could be patient and gentle. She emphasized that a kind partner could make all the difference, turning uncertainty into security, and building a foundation of respect and care that lasted a lifetime. Eliza and Daniel's relationship became a quiet example in their community, not because it was dramatic or flashy, but because it was steady, loving, and kind. Neighbors often remarked on the gentle way they worked together, the respect they showed each other, and the harmony that seemed to surround them. Their home was not perfect, but it was real, and it was filled with love in its truest, most patient form. Years later, Eliza would look back on that first year with gratitude. She had entered the ranch with fear in her heart, unsure of what the future held. But through patience, guidance, and quiet acts of care, she had found a home, learned her own strength, and discovered a love that was kind, steady, and enduring. She realized that life was not about avoiding fear, but about facing it with someone who respected, protected, and valued her. And so, under the wide sky and amidst the fields that stretched endlessly, Eliza found peace, trust, and the gentle power of love. The ranch, once unfamiliar and frightening, had become a place of growth and happiness. Daniel, once a quiet figure she barely knew, had become a partner in every sense, a steady presence, a guide, and a source of unwavering kindness. Eliza had learned a profound truth, that love could be gentle, patient, and understanding. That trust could grow slowly but surely, and that fear, when met with kindness, could transform into courage. In the quiet rhythm of daily life, amidst the beauty of the land and the steady support of a loving partner, she had found her place in the world. A home filled not just with tasks and routines, but with warmth, care, and a love that was true in its simplest, most powerful form.